you say in the book, very interestingly, particularly because we're obsessed at the moment by contagion, that anxiety is contagious. How much evidence is there for that? And is there a flip side to the coin? So can we, as well as making other people anxious, can we help each other out? You might get two people who both experience anxiety, but their anxieties are very different, and they can both see that the other person's anxiety is irrational. They just find it much trickier to self-diagnose.
Yeah, this is a really good question. So here, social contagion, that's the scientific term for what you're talking about, has been known for a long time. There's a lot of research showing basically that emotion or affect can be spread from one person to another. We all know what this is like. If we walk into a party and everybody's having a good time, maybe we weren't feeling so good, but suddenly, woo, we're feeling good. There's social contagion. We've just caught that good feeling that's coming from the party. The same is also true if we get on the phone with a friend and our friend is really anxious and they start telling us about how anxious they are. If we're not careful, we can catch that social contagion. We also see this with social media. So for example, you can prevent the spread of a virus from, by maintaining social distancing, getting vaccinated, wearing a mask and things like that. But anyone can sneeze on your brain from anywhere in the world on social media. Social media is the perfect petri dish for spreading fear and panic. And we've even seen this over the last year where suddenly there's a run on toilet paper at the grocery stores. Why? Just because people are freaking out on social media and other people are going on social media to get information. They're catching that social contagion and suddenly they're running out to the grocery store getting toilet paper as well. We've seen this with a number of different things. So if we don't know how this can be spread, we're going to inadvertently catch it. But if we do know, we can kind of put on our mental mask or get our mental vaccination and see, oh, here's somebody freaking out on social media. Here's somebody panicking. I don't need to panic. Let me check. Oh, I probably have enough toilet paper. Let me check. There's not a global run on toilet paper. I probably don't need to get toilet paper right now. And that way we can cut off the spread of social contagion or by not catching it and spreading it ourselves. But that second piece that you pointed out, I really want to highlight this as well. So just like negative emotions can be spread from one person to another. And in fact, fear and panic get spread really quickly. If you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, we don't have time to go on a social chat forum and discuss the merits of, the saber-toothed tiger running at us, running us down. We have to run, right? So there, it can be spread very, very quickly. Yet we can also spread positive emotions. So for example, kindness. There's some great examples of this over the last year where we saw examples of, people clapping nightly for healthcare workers, if you remember that, or where you see this good feeling story of somebody helping out a neighbor or, doing something, something generous for somebody else. That also feels really, really good. And that positive emotion can be spread through social contagion in the same way that fear can be.
So John, let's get back to self-help and your tips for helping ourselves. But we've been mapping the brain with you. Once we've mapped our brain, once we've kind of understood better what's going on, what should we be doing then? Because there are 3 gears you describe.
Right. So I set the book up in this 3 sections or these 3 gears as you talk about. The first, we've already gone through the first gear, which is basically just mapping out these habit loops. Anybody can do this. That's why we put this habit mapper out, just for anybody to use, So here, let's say that we've mapped out a habit loop around worry. Let's say that we're worried about, a family member getting sick. And, we're triggered when we see that, let's say we've seen a spike in infection rates in the place where our family member is, for example. So if we can step back and map this out, I'm looking at the news, there's the trigger. My behavior is that I'm worrying. And then what's the result of this? Well, it actually makes me more anxious, or maybe it makes me panic. Okay, so step one, or that first gear, is we map it out. The second gear is really critical. And this is a piece that really taps into a lot of relatively recent neuroscience, but this has also been known for several decades. And the basic premise here is that if we've set some behavior up as a habit, then we're going to keep doing it until our brain sees that it's not rewarding anymore. Okay. So the science, the scientific terms aren't that important, but in case anybody's interested, this is called a negative prediction error, which basically means that our brain is, it's going to keep doing a behavior because it's predicting that it is X, it's this rewarding unless proven otherwise. So what we can do is bring in a simple ingredient, which is awareness. We can bring awareness to our behavior as we're doing it. So for example, worrying. I'm worrying that my family member is going to get sick. We can ask ourselves, what do I get from this worrying? And that asking that question brings awareness in and helps us see very clearly how unrewarding that behavior is. Well, if I worry about my family member, it's not actually keeping that person from getting sick. It's just worrying. And it's making me sick with worry, literally, because I'm getting more anxious. And that's got detrimental health effects for me. We can even talk about how anxiety actually dampens the immune system. So literally, we're making ourselves more susceptible to getting an infection by getting worried and anxious. So that second gear is really just asking this simple question. What am I getting from this? And bringing that behavior and the result relationship together. You can think of it as cause and effect. What's the effect of the behavior? When we see that worrying doesn't actually keep our family member safe, it doesn't solve the problem, it doesn't do what our brain has promised that it's going to do, we start to become disenchanted with that behavior. That negative prediction error says to our brain, hey, wait a minute, this isn't really that great. I'm not sure how excited I am to do that in the future. What that does is opens up the space for us to bring in a different behavior. And I think I write about this in the book. I call this the BBO, the bigger, better offer, right? So our brain, it says, well, if worrying isn't really that rewarding, give me something better. And here I think of two of my favorite flavors of the bigger, better offers are curiosity and kindness. So when we're anxious or when we're worrying, we can get curious. Oh, I'm worrying. Can I map this out? Oh, I'm anxious. Can I check to see what this feels like in my body? And as we get curious, we can start to unpack this big bad concept of anxiety. Oh no, I'm anxious. And we, instead of going, oh no, we can go, oh, here's anxiety. Well, what does this feel like in my body? Where is it in my body? What are the qualities? Is it tightness? Is it tension? Is it heat? Is it burning? Where is it in my body? And does it shift over time? And we can start to see, oh, these are just physical sensations, not that they're pleasant, but these are physical sensations, and they actually change over time as I get curious about them. And in fact, we can all explore this for ourselves. We can check to see what feels better, anxiety or curiosity. In fact, my lab's done research on this showing it's a no-brainer when we look at this. Curiosity does feel better. So in moments that we're anxious, we can actually get curious and already start to unwind that anxiety. And at the same time, it helps us step out of these worry habit loops.
You give another very interesting example in a related piece of advice, which is if you eat when you're stressed, for example, instead of going and doing the eating, why not imagine yourself through the process of the eating and imagine how you will feel at the end of it, which is often negative. Mm-hmm. And presumably that can then act as a deterrent to you actually doing the eating.
Yes. In fact, this is based on a study that my lab just completed, where we were working with people who were overeating. And this was using this Eat Right Now app, where we wanted to see how quickly that reward value dropped. And like you're saying, if that imagining doing the behavior could actually help us step out of it. And the reason for that is that, again, this goes back to the prefrontal cortex planning, future behavior based on past behavior. So if we're going to imagine doing something, that forces our brain to recall what it was like when we did it before. So it brings that old reward value up. And if we've really seen what it was like previously to overeat, and we paid attention and we saw, oh, overeating isn't actually that great. That sets up that negative prediction error. We lay down this new reward value and our brain says, overeating isn't that great. I'm not going to do it anymore. But the way that we can actually bring that into the present moment is by imagining doing the behavior before we do it. And in fact, it only takes about 10 to 15 times of somebody paying attention as they overeat to drop that reward value so that it's much easier to imagine doing it in the future and then shift that behavior. We can do the same thing. We've done studies with smoking. If somebody's trying to quit smoking, having them pay attention as they smoke, having them imagine what it's like to smoke afterwards. Again, pretty short period of time where that reward value changes. So eating, smoking, and even worrying. If somebody imagines, oh, as I'm worrying, what am I getting from this? They don't even have to try to imagine what it's like. Oh, what if I worry in the future? Because they tend to be pretty good at just like popping into worrying itself. By bringing that awareness in, that's what can really shift that reward value and change the behavior.
I want to get a little bit more under the skin of the process of helping ourselves. So would you typically recommend that people who do suffer from the sorts of anxieties that you're addressing here implement the sorts of strategies that you're pinpointing hand in hand with seeing a professional? Or do you see your book as something that people can try to implement on their own?
Well, that's one reason I wrote the book, is that there aren't that many professionals of, trained professionals available in general. At least in the United States, it's hard to find a good, psychologist or psychiatrist that can even see you. On top of that, a lot of folks have been trained in the cognitive training modalities where it's like, just use your willpower to stop worrying or something like that. So here, I wrote the book just to really make these techniques accessible for anyone. And certainly, if somebody needs to see a trained health professional, I would encourage that. But the idea is that the book can be a very good place to start. Or for some people, the book is, starts, beginning, middle, and end for them, where I've had a number of people say, I've learned what I've needed to from the book. And so whether it's reading the book or reading the book plus seeing a health professional, or we also have this Unwinding Anxiety app itself that parallels the book. So if somebody wants a step-by-step guidance and it likes digital therapeutics, they can use the book and the app in combination.
So one of the things that you do in the book is to pair anxiety with panic. It doesn't always go hand in hand at all, but it can do. And some health professionals might say that when you're feeling really, really anxious and you get into a panic, your reaction might be then to act at that moment. And because the panic and the anxiety are actually, or maybe irrational, your response may be irrational, and you could do damage to yourself or possibly to others. And therefore to press pause so you live through that panic rather than acting when you're actually undergoing it. Does that sort of advice resonate with you? And how would you recommend that people step outside of a state of panic?
Yes. So here, I think of the definition of panic as something like severe anxiety leading to wildly unthinking behavior. So as you're pointing out, when we panic, we tend not to do things that are that helpful for us and tend to not be that helpful for others as well. So here with panic, sometimes panic is just, we're so panicked that we've got this wildly unthinking behavior. We have no control. So here I would say sometimes it starts after a panic attack where, we then build these skills. We start to map out anxiety, we start to work with it, and we start to build up these resilience skills that can help us work with panic in the moment that panic comes up. And here, building these skills over time can be very helpful so that the moment that a panic attack comes up, we can work with it. For example, when somebody is panicking, and certainly, well, I'll give my own example in a minute, but one way to think of this is when we're panicking, the most important thing is to help us ground ourselves so that we can get our thinking and planning brain back online. one of my favorite practices for helping people ground themselves is what's called 5-finger breathing. And I've got a YouTube video that explains the neuroscience behind this, but basically it's, taking one hand and taking the index finger of the other hand and placing it at the base of the pinky. And as we breathe in, we trace up the outside of our pinky. As we breathe out, we trace down. As we breathe in, we trace up the outside of our ring finger. As we breathe out, we trace down. So basically, as we go through 5 breaths, we've paid attention to physical sensations in 2 different hands. We've paid attention to the physical sensation of breathing, and we've also brought in visual perception. So that's 4 things that our working memory part of our brain has to pay attention to at once. Our working memory can't hold many more things in working memory at once. And so what that does is helps to reboot our brain so that we've kind of the physiology tends to calm down as we're taking mindful breaths. Our breathing tends to slow down as well. Our physiology starts to come down. And what that does, as that calming down process happens, it makes it basically reboots the working memory part of our brain so that we can actually think and plan, so that it can help us step out of a panic attack. There are other things, and I write about this noting practice, for example, in my book. This is what I used to work with my own panic attacks, but this was after I had been doing noting practice for a while. So it was kind of my habitual response. I would wake up from, very deep sleep with a full-blown panic attack. And as I was having that panic attack, I would note. So noting practice is basically helping us note, what's present. Are we seeing? Are we feeling? What are the thoughts? What are our physical sensations, et cetera? And so I wake up from a full-blown panic attack and I would note, oh, I feel like I'm going to die. Oh, my breath is very short and shallow. Oh, my heart is racing. Oh, I'm very sweaty. And so I could note those things. And then what that does is there's this term in physics called the observer effect, where, back in the day when they were trying to measure the mass of electrons, they would have to actually hit those electrons with photons, and they realized that they were changing the mass of the electron by measuring it. So this observer effect means you're going to change the result by observing. Well, we can actually change the result of a panic attack by observing. By observing, oh, there's tightness, as compared to, oh no, I'm going to die, where I'm taking that, I'm caught up in it. If I note, oh, there's this thought of impending doom. There's a feeling of tightness in my chest. There are these physical sensations. That perception, that observation helps provide some distance where I can gain perspective. And with that perspective, I'm no longer as identified with the panic attack. And so I can observe it, and I can observe, okay, those are thoughts, those are physical sensations and whatnot. And then when the panic attack passes, importantly, I'm not worried about having a future panic attack, because I can see, oh, this was a panic attack. Okay, not a big deal. And then I can move on, or in my case, get back to sleep.
So you almost become your own doctor at that point. And you ask us in the book to think about perhaps how a teacher might react to how we're feeling.
Yes, I think of this as, even the really challenging things, we can look at them 2 ways. One is we can go, oh no, that was terrible. And we can judge ourselves for how we reacted. We can beat ourselves up. We can say, I'm never going to change. Or we can lean in and we can go, oh, and we can bow to it as a teacher and say, oh, what can I learn about my own mind from what just happened? So for example, if I had a panic attack, I can ask, oh, wow, I would actually go down the DSM checklist, the diagnostic checklist, and go check. Oh, I just had a panic attack. Oh, now I know what a panic attack feels like the first time I had one, right? So when we get caught up in a worry habit loop, for example, or get caught up in a panic attack, we can bow to it as a teacher and ask, what can I learn from this? So that the next time I can actually work with it more skillfully. And often, I don't know about you, but I learn more from things that are challenging or things that I quote unquote failed at than I do from things going well.
Much earlier, you talked about habits and the relationship between habits and anxiety. And you address in the book the question of how long it can take to form a new habit.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that. And also in the context of some people would say that, let's take OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, which you might describe as a branch of anxiety.
Mhm.
That can be very deeply rooted in an individual. It might stem from quite early in childhood and therefore could be quite tricky to untangle because it's been there for so long. Do you find in your experience of treating people that it takes a different amount of time to get on top of the anxiety or indeed to change someone's habits?
Yeah. So this is a fascinating story so when I looked at this, because there's this idea that changing a habit, whether it's breaking a bad one or forming a new one, takes about 21 days. And people have come to me constantly, oh, I heard it was 21 days. So I went and looked this up to see, where's the science behind this? And it turns out there's no science behind this. It is all thanks to the internet and, popular articles, and probably the fact that we want to have, one, a concrete number, and two, a number that's not too long. So when people are more likely to perpetuate those stories, even if they're false. So this goes back to it was a plastic surgeon from the 1960s who wrote in his book that it takes about 3 weeks for somebody to get used to their new nose job when they have plastic surgery. And that became mimified to the point where people are saying, oh, it takes 21 days to start a new habit. Well, he was observing that his patients, were getting used to their noses. That's not generalizable to habit change overall. So here, if you look at the science and if you look at the math here, this actually goes back to the 70s. There were these two researchers called Rescorla and Wagner who came up with this formula around reinforcement learning. Basically, how long, when is a habit going to change? And in that formula, it's all based on previous reward value, as we've already talked about. If something's rewarding, we're going to keep doing it. And this error term, which we've also talked about, which is, if we see that it's not rewarding, we're going to stop doing it. So the more quickly we see that something is very unrewarding, and the more unrewarding we see it to be, the more that negative prediction error comes in and says, hey, stop doing that because this really isn't very rewarding. Notice how in that equation, there is no term for childhood. So even though something can get formed in our, as young as when we're children, for example, my patient had developed worrying, when he was about 8 or 10 years old, and he came to see me when he was 40. That had started a long, long, long time ago. But when we mapped out his habit loop, to change a behavior, you've got to focus on what's happening right now. And so here, it's really about what am I getting from this now as compared to, what caused this to happen? Because that's ancient history. For many of us, it really is ancient history. And just the fact that kicked things off, that's not what changes the behavior in the present moment. Does that make sense?
Given you just mentioned